Okay, this lesson is 7.1, ratios and proportions. Make sure that's in pen. Essential question that needs to be in your notes as well. How can we simplify ratios and also solve proportions? So we're going to be talking about that in today's lesson. What is a ratio? How do we simplify it? Also, what is a proportion and how can we solve for unknowns that are in a proportion? Remember, you guys can pause this video at any time, rewind it if I'm going too fast. Ratios, so you have some definitions. The rule with notes is everything that you see on the screen needs to go in your notes, unless I say specifically you don't have to write something down. A ratio is a comparison of two different units by division. For example, 15 miles to 3 hours is what we call a ratio. See how we're comparing two different units, right? What are the two units that are being compared? Miles and hours. A ratio can be written three different ways. You can write it like this with a colon, 15 to 3. You can actually write it with the word 2, 15 to 3. Or this is by far the most popular way that we write a ratio, and you can just write it as a fraction, 15 over 3. Ratios. In a ratio, the units must match in order to simplify and compare, all right? So make sure you write down this example in your notes. We're going to rewrite this ratio so that the numerator and the denominator have the same unit of measure. Then we're going to simplify. So you can see we have a ratio here, 6 feet to 24 inches. The problem is that we're comparing two different units here. So in order to simplify and reduce, we need to convert this ratio by multiplying by a conversion factor. So I will always give you the conversion factor. For this one, the conversion factor is that there is 12 feet, not feet, 12 inches is equal to 1 foot. That is our conversion factor, right? So we're going to multiply, so I can write this as a ratio. I can write it like this, 12 inches over 1 foot. Or I can write it 1 foot over 12 inches, right? We, in this case, want to multiply by this conversion factor, and we want to make sure that the inches are opposite. So I'm going to put 12 inches on top and 1 foot on the bottom. So we're going to use this way, and here's the reason why. We want the units to cancel out. So you can see inches are on the bottom of the fraction here, the ratio here, and when I multiply, I want them to be opposite. I want them to be on top. So that way, they cancel out. Inches divided by inches cancels, right? Just like 6 divided by 6 or 12 divided by 12, right? They would cancel each other out. Same goes for feet. So you can see how the units of feet are also opposite, feet and feet. So those are going to cancel out. So now by doing that, I've eliminated the units, and I'm going to end up with another fraction. So when we multiply fractions, we're going to multiply straight across. So 6 times 12 is 72, and 24 times 1 is 24. I always get this question, do we reduce? You always reduce. Always, always, always. So let's go ahead and reduce this. 72 divided by 24, I believe if you actually, let's pull up the calculator here, 72 divided by 24, I think that's exactly 3, and I was right. So that's going to reduce to 3 over 1, or just 3. And that is your simplified ratio, 3 to 1, or just 3. Oftentimes with a ratio, we'll leave the 1 in the bottom. Now I want you to try to do it on your own. So go ahead and pause this video. Write this example down. You do not have to write these steps down. Okay, these are just helpful steps for you for this specific problem. But if you want to write them down and generalize them, that might be a good idea. Okay, you should have paused the video by now. If you haven't, you should be pausing it and trying it on your own. So we're going to go ahead and multiply by you can see we're comparing feet and yards. We don't want that. We want to simplify this by multiplying by the conversion factor. So there are 3 feet in 1 yard. So the question is, should I multiply by 3 over 1 or 1 over 3? So if you remember from the last problem, you should see that yards are on the bottom of the ratio here, so I want them to be on the top of the ratio here. So I'm going to say 1 yard is equivalent to 3 feet. So 1 over 3. And then what happens is feet divided by feet cancels, yards divided by yards cancels. I don't want that to be a triangle. Now let's just multiply straight across. So 3 times 1 is 3. 7 times 3 is 21. And then we can simplify this by 3. 3 over 3, right? They're both divisible by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 21 divided by 3 is 7. So 1/7 is our reduced ratio. And that's really all there is to it. Let's move on. Let's talk about a proportion and what a proportion is. A proportion compares two ratios and they are equal to one another. You can see in the example below that the two ratios are equal to one another. This is what we call a proportion. So we have a ratio here, 3 times some number x over 4 is equal to some other ratio, 27 over 12. Right? They are equal to one another. So we can solve this by cross multiplying, and here's why. I'll show you what I mean by cross multiplying. 1/2 is a fraction. Can you guys think of another fraction that is equal to 1/2? Maybe you thought of 2/4, maybe you thought of 3/6 or 5/10 or 10 over 20 or 50 over 100. Those would all be equal to 1/2 and they would all be fine. When we cross multiply with two fractions or two ratios that equal to one another, when I say cross multiply, here's what I mean. Let's multiply those cross products. What's 2 times 2? Hopefully you're thinking 4. What's 4 times 1? Hopefully you're thinking 4. Do you see how when we multiply the cross products, they are equivalent to one another? That will always be true. Okay, when you multiply the cross products in a proportion, they are always equal to one another. So we use that fact in order to solve proportions. So we have our proportion here, which is just two fractions that equal one another, or two ratios that equal one another. So we're simply going to cross multiply and set them equal to one another. Why? For this reason right here, because we can, and it makes it easier to solve the equation. So let's do that. What's 3x times 12? Hopefully you're thinking 36x. And what's 27 times 4? Go ahead and use your calculator if you need to. All right, hopefully you're thinking 108. Let's double check. I would hate to do it wrong. I'm almost positive though. 27 times 4, yep, 108. So that means that 36x is equal to 108. Now, that should be a very familiar equation. This is a super simple equation to solve. Back from middle school, we're simply going to divide by 36 on both sides here, and we're going to get an answer. So let's see what 108 divided by 36 is. Divided by 36, 3. Exactly. Look at that. Cool. So x equals 3. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you solve for unknowns in a proportion. You use that cross property rule, the cross product rule. Okay, the cross products will always be equal to one another. Go ahead and copy this one down. Same thing as last time. So you're going to go ahead and copy this down right here. All right. Go ahead and copy these steps down as well. All right, for solving a proportion, because you might need those later. Go ahead and try this on your own. So you're going to pause me right now. Try it on your own. All right, and then go ahead and play this once you've gotten an answer. So hopefully you've done that already. Let's go ahead and cross multiply. So I'm going to take x plus 1, and I'm going to multiply it by 5, and I'm going to take 12 and multiply it by -2. So do you see this negative in front of 2/5? I often get the question, Mr. Falls, how do I know what's negative, the 2 or the 5? It doesn't matter. You can make either one negative as long as only one. So for example, I can rewrite it like this, -2 over 5, or I could even rewrite it like this if I wanted to, right? 2 over -5. It doesn't matter. All right, but I usually just move it up to the top. Okay, it makes more sense that way to me. All right, so let's go ahead and multiply here and let's see what we get. So 5 again is multiplying x plus 1. And that's going to be equal to the other cross product, which is, what did we say, -2 times 12, right? So let's clean this up a little bit. We have to distribute right here. You can't just multiply 5 times x. You must also do 5 times 1. So 5x plus 5 is the result. And then -2 times 12 is -24. And then this is a pretty basic equation that we should be able to solve, right? We're going to use inverse operations. So the opposite of plus 5 is to subtract 5. and that will cancel that. What we do to one side, we must do to the other. So now we have 5x is equal to, that's negative 29, right? Negative 24 minus 5. And then we're going to divide by 5 on both sides to solve for x. And we end up with negative 29 over 5. So that is not divisible, right? 5 does not go into 29, so you can leave it like that, or we can write it as a decimal. You can leave it as a fraction or write it as a decimal. Understand that they are the same thing. One is just a fraction, one is just a decimal. So you can see right here, 29 divided by 5 is 5.8, right? So we could say, or negative 5.8. They are both the same. I think you should leave it as a fraction, but if you see like some multiple choice answers that are decimals, then you're going to need to divide it to make it a decimal. And lastly, here's some examples of where you can write a proportion to solve to find an answer. So we're going to use a proportion here and solve it to find an answer. In math class, write these down. The girl to boy ratio is 8 to 6. If there are 24 girls in the class, how many boys are there? So first I'm going to start with this ratio. It's an 8 to 6 ratio of girls to boys. So I'm going to say 8 girls, 6 boys, right, is equal to, it says if there's 24 girls in the class, how many boys are there, right? So that's going to be equal to, we know there's 24 girls in the class, so I'm going to put that on the top. See how girls are on the top in each ratio. Over, we want the boys to be on the bottom in the second ratio here. So we don't know how many boys are in the class, right? So we're going to say x. And that's what we're going to solve for. So how are we going to solve? Cross multiplying, right? So 24 times 6 is going to be equal to 8 times x. We know that 8 times x is 8x. And 24 times 6, let's just double check here. 24 times 6, that's 144. And then we're just going to divide by 8 on both sides. So 144 divided by 8 is 18. Look at that. So we're going to say x equals 18, but anytime there's a word problem, we should always answer with a sentence. Okay, so you should say there are 18 boys. And that's how you would use a proportion to solve a comparison problem like that. See if you can do the next one. Pause me. Okay, so hopefully you have this ratio proportion set up. 4 pairs costs $80. That's a ratio. 4 pairs, $80, and that's going to be equal to 7 pairs cost some amount of dollars X. That's the question, right? So we're going to cross multiply to find out. So we know that 4 times X will be equal to 7 times 80. 4 times X is 4X, and 7 times 80 is 560. And we're just going to divide by 4 on both sides. And it looks like that's going to be 140, I believe, if my math is correct. I'm pretty sure. So we're going to say x equals 140. But again, we should be answering in a sentence, right? So you're going to say 7 pairs would cost $140. Ladies and gentlemen, that's ratios and proportions. Always write a summary. So right now at the end of your notes, you need to skip a line and summarize everything that we just talked about in the notes today, and you will be done with the notes. And this is a 7.1 lesson. Let me know if you have any questions.